So you're gonna have turkey and ham?
Fucking A, right.
That's insane.
That's normal. That's normal.
That's crazy.
Yeah, my family in Georgia, at least for Christmas, they would always have a turkey and a ham.
Yeah.
What?
We always had turkey
How many
and lechon.
people are you talking about?
A lot.
Enough to eat. You know.
The leftovers are the best part.
Too.
Yeah.
That's the best part, man.
I eat a lot, and I really like the sort of fall and winter holiday meals, and I think that's crazy to have both of those objects.
Remember the burdensome ham?
Oh, I can't get over the burdensome ham. My mom,
Right.
like, what was it at the beginning of like COVID or something, or around that time?
Of COVID, yeah.
She had bought. She's vegan, but she saw a ham for sale at the grocery store, like a full ham, and so she bought it for us, thinking like, well, now, and then it was like it
was so big,
you should come and visit or whatever, and so eventually we managed to do so, and she had it in the freezer and she gave it to us. It was like a 25-pound ham or something. It was huge, and we brought it back home and we cooked it, and it was it was very delicious. It was like a nice thought or whatever.
But was like summer.
It's an insane amount of ham. Yeah, then it was over summer, and we had it for like a week just in the fridge, and it was just like every meal was just this incredibly salty ham.
And it was nightmares about eating it.
Yeah, it was just insane. It was a burdensome ham. We would like lay awake at night, like
we're gonna
sitting
have to
just
eat ham in the morning.
silently in bed, like so thirsty, and just like turning to each other. It's just like, I guess ham for breakfast.
I guess I'll be making
know.
scrambled eggs with ham in the morning. So enjoy that.
See, everybody. That's the thing. Is that everybody makes a whole big deal of the turkey, but it's not. The ham is the better part.
I used to think that, yeah.
Yeah, when I was a child,
when I was younger and more naive, I used to think things like that. Yeah.
Oh no, man! This is it's only a few times a year that I get to have a meal like the Gilded Age industrialist in that I want to be gustatorially, and it's just going to be a waterfall of different wines and aperitifs, and I'm going to be, again, just like my ankles are just going to be swollen with gout at the end of the meal, and it's going to be so good. That's what I'm looking for.
You know what I like to do?
Have a cheese course.
When it's really, if it's really cold, and especially like in our apartment now where the heat is broken, right? When you like cook the meal, like to eat with it, to drink with it, get some apple cider and boil it, and then like mix some liquor in that. It's like just hot cider. It's so good.
I think what you're talking about is kind of like a mulled cider,
Yeah.
You just buy like a jug of apple cider at the store and boil it. Yes, it's so good. What's the problem?
I won't be doing that.
Oh, you will be doing that. You'll be drinking it and you'll like it.
I won't.
I'm on a wonderful medication called Cabernet Sauvignon. It's been around for a long time, and I've got to really go for it.
I'm gonna come to all of your houses like a deranged Santa Claus, and I'm gonna boil all of your cold soft drinks, your sodas, your seltzers, your ciders, and you're gonna be so happy when it's freezing cold. You'll thank me.
Just a warm Sprite.
Well, I'm going to serve. I'm going to serve all of my family. All of the beverages are going to be unboiled. Actually, they're going to be at normal temperatures.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Reasonable.
Dwight's family is Mormon.
For Thanksgiving, we're serving my favorite meat, hot dog. Look it up, man. He said it. All right, let's fucking go.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Fucking Thanksgiving,
Yeah,
man. Let's
okay.
do this.
Yeah.
That's it, baby.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams,
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off his death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Gobble, gobble.
We've got Chris.
Hello.
And we have Carrie.
Hello.
Welcome, everyone, to Thanksgiving. We hope that everyone is warm, sitting by the hearth, preparing themselves to eat in a way that is frankly irresponsible, and one of the only ways we can derive enjoyment in late-stage capitalism, which is to engorge ourselves so much that we don't feel anymore except for the need for Tums, which... I'm sorry.
Are you
I'm just
okay,
kidding.
buddy?
No, I'm just describing what I'm going to be doing this week. I just want to.
You know what helps? You know what helps settle the stomach? A nice
What?
boiled cider.
No. Maybe I will do a mulled wine. Just with some wine and cloves and star anise, perhaps.
It
Just
could
try
happen.
boiling it one time. One time is all I'm saying. You'll never go back, dude. You'll never go back to drinking it the wrong way.
Because you'll be dead.
I'm going to drink my beverages at the temperature that I feel like it is,
Okay.
Go
The
on.
wrong one, but whatever.
which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So look, as is our tradition with this the Thanksgiving holiday, we wanted to bring to you some stories. We wanted to be specific, especially this this year, about Thanksgiving itself and the sort of the fuck is the word I'm thinking of? Fucking food. Anyway, food. There's a better way for it. Culinary
Gluttony?
shit.
Culinary.
Oh,
culinary.
culinary. Yeah.
Culinary. Fucking state school delinquent bullshit. All right. So anyway, wanted to talk a little bit about the the culinary exploits of this holiday, and some of its the specifics of it. I did want to warm up really quickly by just giving this quick stat for us in 2021, and I'm reading this from the Detroit Free Press from Sue Solaski, and it came out this week. And it said, Thanksgiving dinner will cost 14% more this year, annual survey finds. And
Thanks
I don't
a
want...
lot, Joe Biden.
Wow. Inflation much?
Here we go. It says, disruptions in the supply chain, inflation, and food demand since the pandemic are driving up the cost. It says here, these include dramatic disruptions in the U.S. economy and supply chains over the last 20 months, inflationary pressure throughout the economy, difficulty in predicting demand during COVID-19 pandemic, and high global demand for food, particularly meat, said Veronica Nye, a senior economist for the American Farm Bureau Federation. And I just thought that was interesting, especially in a time where, we are, famously unmoneyed, and there is more want in this country than we care to admit. And it's just quite wild. And I just think, again, like, I don't want to talk about electoral politics, but like, we're so fucked, man. I mean, just everything is going poorly, as it seems, for, between this and the price of gas, and there's just it's going to be a fucking bloodbath in 2022. Anyway, so aside from that, we wanted to talk about some of the origins of some of the foods that we eat for this. And I'll go ahead and go first and talk about turkey.
Yeah.
It's, I mean,
I love turkey.
I think what's important to understand from the perspective of the Armenian genocide is, the Turkey as a belligerent was really, hang on, this is a totally different file than I was looking at. Hang on, give me a second to, okay, that was 1.5 million Armenians. Okay, different file. I'm just going to close this out. I wanted to talk a little bit about Turkey. And specifically as well, like, dispel some of the shit about the first Thanksgiving. Because we talked about this, I think, 2 years ago. Or maybe the first one that we did about, this massive massacre of Wampanoags in like, the Connecticut-Rhode Island border and all that stuff. And I just wanted to go back to an NPR article that I read through that just gives, like, a quick little primer about Thanksgiving, which was interesting, by Robert Krulwich in 2011. And it's entitled here, just so we understand, like, that turkey was never a part of the, initial lore of this. It says, first Thanksgiving dinner, no turkeys, no ladies, no pies. So it just says, it's like a quick little, like, call and response here. And it just says, how long was the first Thanksgiving dinner? It wasn't just a dinner. It lasted 3 days. Who was there? About 50 pilgrims came, plus 90 Wampanoag Indians, says the writer Andrew Bears. About 2 of every 3 people there were Wampanoag. Maybe this is why, in the middle of the party, the English took out their muskets and, quote, exercised arms, which Bears says was probably target practice, which is their subtle way of saying, guess who's got the firepower here?
Oh.
So in case you were wondering whether or not this was like, a really nice, avuncular feeling, family-oriented, nice sit-down, truce, ceasefire, it was very much not that. It was very much like, hey, let's just understand where we're at, and by the way, don't try to mess with us because we've got firearms, basically. Actually, it's quite American now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah,
That's more American
really
than that.
seems to set the
For real.
tone.
Was it a family event? Were ladies there? Probably not. The only eyewitness accounts mentioned some, quote, 90 men. This was a political gathering. The Wampanoags and Pilgrims were cementing a military alliance. Massasoit, the Wampanoag king, was there. So was the English governor, William Bradford. The first Thanksgiving was mostly a guys-only event where the English woman, says Bears, were likely doing a bulk of the cooking. All of it was held outdoors. So here's the question. Did they eat turkey? No, we don't think so. The Wampanoag guests brought 5 deer with them, so venison was on the menu. The English brought fowl, probably migrating waterfowl like ducks and geese, which was plentiful in autumn. And Governor William Bradford does mention taking turkeys that year, but not in connection to the harvest celebration. So let's talk about how did turkey get to be the Thanksgiving bird? And I want to, I'm setting this up because I want to talk a little bit about how we currently consume our turkeys, especially from, agribusiness. But long story short, there was an author named Sarah Josepha Hale who had written to basically every living former president, including the current president at the time, who was Abraham Lincoln, saying that, hey, this is something that we want to do. And she, made it a weird, a career-long push.
She was a crank. So she was a crank then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is what cranks
She was
do
just like a
nowadays.
turkey-hating crank.
No,
It was like
turkey loving, but it was.
Okay.
But I don't quite. She
was a
she had a
turkey
thing
head.
for turkey. I don't know what to say. It said here, Abe Lincoln helped by declaring Thanksgiving a national holiday. And as a separate note, I don't want to belabor it, but it was very much like, hey, things are a little tense over the last 5 years or so with the Civil War. So let's cement a kind of national holiday to say, hey, let's hang out together,
chill.
get drunk, and listen to your uncles say slurs at the table. So it says here, Abe Lincoln helped by declaring Thanksgiving a national holiday. I'm sure turkey and the turkey and cranberry industries helped too, but Bears gives his biggest props to a 19th century magazine editor named Sarah Josepha Hale. She and her magazine, Godey's Ladies Book, campaiged for a national.
That's not a
this
real
is the 1800s.
magazine.
Not anymore.
Ladies. book.
I read that because I'm a girl.
Is-
Gaudy girl boss gatekeep.
She wrote letters to governors, to every member of Congress, even to the president. And when she wasn't lobbying, she was writing novels that romanticized turkeys in that
Freak.
What?
Freak.
I knew you'd like
This
it.
is
Yeah.
like those Bigfoot
Sicko.
fetish novels, but of turkeys.
I'm reading now from her.
Romanticized turkey.
Yes. I'm reading now from her 1827 novel called Northwood, and it reads as follows. The roasted turkey took precedence on this occasion, being placed at the head of the table. And while it did become its lordly station, sending forth the rich odor of its savory stuffing, and finally covered with the froth of its basting. At the foot of the board, a sirloin of beef, flanked on either side by a leg of pork and a loin of mutton, seemed placed as a bastion to defend the innumerable bowls of gravy and plates of vegetables disposed in that quarter. A goose and pair of ducklings occupied side stations on the table, the middle being graced, as it is always on such occasions, by the rich burgomaster of the provisions called a chicken pie.
What the fuck kind of word is that?
I gotta look it up. Burgomaster.
Oh, Burgomaster, sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, interesting. It is the mayor of a Dutch, Flemish,
Yeah.
German, Austrian, or Swiss town.
Like a burger, like a same root.
See,
bourgeois.
that speaks to me.
Yeah.
So it is just fucking crazy. And I like how Robert Krulwich puts this here. He's like, that's turkey, then sirloin, then pork, then lamb, then goose, then duck, then chicken pie, all in one sitting. Did they eat small portions or just explode? I don't know. But notice by 1827, chicken pie, once in contention, has been shoved to the end of the table. Anyway, I just thought that was cute. But again,
I like how you consider that medley of meats to be insane, but turkey and ham, that's a normal thing.
see, I think that this is the kind of like banquet that I would like to go to, where it's just like
You're
every
sick.
game bird from the King's lease that we can get our hands on, and then we just drown ourselves in wine, and then eventually die of lead poisoning from the buckshot from the birdshot.
You should go to Medieval Times, the like show where they serve you like
No, you should just go to medieval times, the time
the
period.
time period.
Yeah.
I am going to do as a show of faith and an honoring for the early Americas. I'm going to do turducken this year for
Oh my
the
gosh.
Thanksgiving
Very
feast.
nice. Very nice.
That's very exciting.
There's no way you don't fucking get salmonella from that. Like, there's no way you cook it all the way through. There's just no
I
way.
could easily cook it all the way through. It would be so easy for me.
There's like the turkey must just turn to fucking dust on the outside.
I would punt
before
it into a deep fryer from a distance. It would be done.
So dangerous. Oh my god. All right. So that brings us to today, right? There was this weird crank-like lobbying to have turkey be this like center of the table,
So
and
fucking
it
crazy.
I know, and there's a lot to be said. I mean, like, I think if fucking Ben Franklin like wanted the turkey to
Yes.
be the American animal, right, instead of
Yes.
the eagle.
Mhm.
I only know that from the musical 1776.
Really?
There's a song, between Ben Franklin and I think somebody else wanted it to be the hawk or the dove or something, and then they compromise on the eagle.
See, I'm reading
We
here.
could play out with that song if I can find it.
Yes, I'm reading here from the Franklin Institute, which inexplicably has a .edu domain, but it reads here: the story about Benjamin Franklin wanting the national bird to be a turkey is just a myth. Oh, fuck. The false story.
Yeah, there you go.
Owned.
Yeah, it was just because it was in the
Owned.
fucking musical.
Yeah,
That's
I knew
probably
that
why.
wasn't true.
Oh.
Huh.
It
Hell
says
yeah.
here, this false story began as a result of a letter Franklin wrote to his daughter criticizing the original eagle design for the Great Seal, saying it looked more like a turkey. In the letter, Franklin wrote that, quote, the bald eagle is a bird of bad moral character. He does not get his living honestly. He is too lazy to fish for himself.
He's a
Which I think
bitch.
he was projecting a little bit there, if we're honest.
Oh my god.
True statesman, genius.
Genius.
Just writing ornery letters about birds.
Did you say, and I'm sorry to go back to it, but I really want to understand, do we know anything about that lady's like motivation to like be a proponent of eating turkey?
She was like jilted by a turkey as a when she was young, and so she had a vendetta against turkeys and wanted them to be slaughtered in mass.
Oh my god.
I'm with Chris's. I agree with Chris's read that there's just cranks throughout history. Just
Yeah,
cranks
absolutely.
throughout history.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
So I wanted to read from now we're at this point where this is, in our American lore, we have this weird love for turkeys as much as, manufactured as it is. But of course, for out of the 200, and this statistic like blew my mind, 250 million turkeys are produced and slaughtered every year for human consumption.
Rack 'em.
Is
by
that worldwide?
agribusiness. The United
Or
States
just,
only.
in just the United States? Yeah.
Now, it's not just Thanksgiving consumption, but year-round people, it's a cold cut, right? They got fucking sliced turkey. That's
Right.
Oh, yeah.
That's it's a fucking sliced turkey bodega sandwich. You can't really beat it. But of course, since most of our economy is being consolidated into larger and larger and fewer firms and enterprises, the risk of malpractice and skirting of humanity or animal husbandry for profit is ripe. And so I came across, with a little bit of direction from Shane here, I came across this website called butterballabuse.com.
Oh no.
Oh yes.
Oh boy.
And this is put on by a interest group called a nonprofit called Mercy for Animals. Now, I will preface this to say, like, I am a meat eater, and that is not to say that I don't think about this a lot. And we've talked about it on the on the program before. Like, I even said, like, and I still think this, maybe it's only because I haven't done it yet, but I'm like, I think that if you eat meat, like, you should, like, see what a slaughterhouse looks like and, like, understand what it is. Because if for nothing else, out of, like, respect to the animals that die for us for sustenance and shit, like, you know, there is, like, some morality to it that I think about a lot. And if I have a choice to, you know, from a farm, from where I get the shit, I try to buy, like, a local place that, like, knows who their butcher is and all that stuff. And it is fucking more expensive. And there's no way around that. It's like in the same way that, like, electric cars and shit, like, how do we save the planet? Oh, we switch to electric vehicles or whatever. It's like, yeah, but the only rich can fucking buy them. So it's bullshit. And the same logic goes with this here. But, you know, so with this organization, Mercy for Animals, I'm just going to read their mission statement here. It says, Mercy for Animals' mission is to construct a compassionate food system that is not just kind to animals, but essential for the future of our planet and all who share it. Our vision of a world where animals are respected, protected, and free drives the work we do every day. So this was, you know, I thought that this was fine enough. And so they did an expose over many years, like a multi-years investigation into Butterball. You know, everybody knows the name. They are actually responsible for 20%, or 1/5 of all American turkey production. And
So that's 50 million turkeys.
It's a lot.
That's a lot of fucking turkeys, dude.
Yeah.
And so Mercy for Animals, MFA, went and had those, like, fucking hidden cameras and shit, and went into these slaughterhouses. I think in some cases even, like, applying for jobs and getting in there to see what's going on in these. And the conditions are fucked and horrific. And I'm going to read from a few different articles, if I may. And again, like, the point of this is to understand that, like, how a capitalist political economy creates the incentives for these conditions. And so I'm just going to open up this first link here, because obviously since this happened over a few different years, there was a lot of different news stories about this. But I'm going to read from, firstly, this news story from the MFA blog. This is the Mercy for Animals blog. And it reads as such. This is from 2013. Hidden camera video secretly shot at a North Carolina Butterball factory farm by Mercy for Animals undercover investigator has led to even more criminal convictions of Butterball workers. Earlier today, defendants Terry Johnson and Billy McBride were found guilty of animal cruelty after a bench trial before Judge John H. Horn Jr. In late 2012, Butterball workers Brian Douglas and Ruben Mendoza were also convicted of criminal cruelty to animals arising out of the same investigation. Douglas's conviction marks the first ever felony conviction for cruelty to factory farm poultry in U.S. history, which, when you hear about this, it would make you feel pretty fucking bleak. MFA's undercover video shows that the lives of turkeys in Butterball's factory farms are brutal and filled with fear, violence, and prolonged suffering. Butterball's turkeys have been selectively bred to grow so large so quickly that many of them suffer from painful bone defects, hip and joint lesions, crippling foot and leg deformities, and fatal heart attacks. Due to the company's lack of meaningful animal welfare policies, training, or procedures, Butterball subjects countless turkeys to immeasurable cruelty and neglect each year. So to color that, I'd like to get this other article up to explain just how bad it is and what they do.
You know, I was thinking while you were talking that one of my friends was telling me the other day that slaughterhouse workers have a much higher incidence of suicide than the general population.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
they're brutal conditions for both
Yeah.
the animals and the laborers, you know?
I mean, like, treating animals like that, like, obviously has psychological effects
Yeah.
for the workers. Yeah.
There was a homeless shelter that I was in for a short period of time in Petaluma, California, and it's kind of like a sort of rural area outside of the town. There's a lot of farms and stuff, and like a lot of the guys that lived there, they all worked at this like chicken farm, and like they all worked, like, you know, killing the chickens and dressing them and, you know, doing all that stuff and hanging them up and whatever, you know. They gave them like the most awful part of it, you know, like actually killing the animals.
Sure.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, so it sounds pretty bleak, and I'm going to read here from a mspca.org, just like a little explanation of what actually happens here on the farm and what the life cycle, and essentially what is the business cycle of these animals. All right, I'm just going to read through this. It's pretty rough content, so content warning if anybody is sensitive to this sort of thing. So it says here, most turkeys raised for meat are selectively bred, a process perfected over many generations to produce the most meat on a bird in the shortest period of time and using the least amount of feed necessary, right? So this is like a capital efficiency question as well. Mm-hmm. What are the input costs? What is the time to, recapitalization? Like when do you recover your investment? And what do you get as far as profit goes out of it? For many years, turkey farmers bred their own small-breasted turkeys. In the last half century, however, the breeding industry has become so integrated and intensified that almost 90% of all the turkeys in the world are heavy-breasted varieties supplied by only 3 primary breeding companies. This control allows for breeders to hatch turkeys with only the desired genetic traits, the most important of which, fast growth. And to color that, it says here, if a human baby grew at the same rate as modern turkeys, it would weigh 1,500 pounds by the age of 18 weeks.
Wow.
Similar to the welfare issues that exist in chicken and egg industries, the abnormal weight and size of these turkeys leads to numerous welfare problems. Many turkeys, we heard this in the first article we read, many turkeys suffer from abnormal gait, hip lesions, and skeletal disease. While the meat content of the turkeys has increased over the years, their bone structures have not, and the birds often have problems standing. These leg disorders cause turkeys to spend most of their lives lying down, where they contract other lesions, blisters, and burns. And the more deformed turkeys also have a high risk of being trampled to death under the other turkeys that are still able to walk. Fast growth consequences even beyond bone disorders include lowered immune performance, muscle disease, hemorrhaging, heart disease, and aortic rupture. So again, what this completely disregards is like any tenets of like animal husbandry or even morality of like what the life of another living thing is incurring, for profit.
Sure.
So on the farm, turkeys raised in the factory farms are hatched in large incubators with the warmth or nest of a mother. After a few weeks, they are moved to large warehouse-like sheds. They are stocked in such high densities that they are unable to express many important natural behaviors, such as the abilities to roost or even flap their wings. These grower houses confine thousands of turkeys together, and they're usually windowless with temperatures controlled through forced ventilation. To prevent the turkeys from injuring one another, and this is the one that got me, in such tight quarters, parts of their beaks and toes are removed without anesthesia.
Oh.
Just so they don't peck or injure themselves. It's protecting the investment, essentially. Millions of turkeys don't survive the first few weeks of factory farm life, succumbing to, quote, starve out, which is the condition in which young birds simply stop eating, presumably due to stress. Turkey excrement quickly accumulates on the floors, and as bacteria break down the litter, the air becomes polluted with ammonia, dust, and fungal spores. And again, even if you're just thinking about this in like a selfish, like as far as the quality of the product goes, like that's fucking disgusting. Like thinking about what we're eating. Like, that's fucking gross to be eating animals that are just like standing on another dead animal. Like, that's what we're like when we think about like, there was an outbreak of salmonella or something like that. It's because we have a fucking disgusting food supply chain. It's barbaric. It's fucking gross. Like, even fucking Romans made fucking aqueducts and sewers. This is like disgusting. So it says here, turkeys, and this is about the slaughter itself. Turkeys and other poultry are not protected by federal regulations during slaughter, meaning they are not required to be rendered senseless before they are killed. Some are stunned through the use of an electric water bath. But this method is not perfect. Many turkeys are not successfully rendered unconscious prior to slaughter and are burned or drowned alive. And part of the reason of that is that in order to take feathers off, like the defeathering process, they dip them temporarily in a bath of boiling water, and that makes like the where the feather connects to the skin more like tender and easy for it to be plucked. But oftentimes they're not killed properly, or even if they're hung upside down and they're bled out by slitting the throat or whatever, if the overworked or fucking crazy worker like doesn't do it properly, they just simply are drowned in the boiling water. And that's just, that's their last moments. So pretty fucking horrific, to say the least. And there were some real ramifications from this MFA, the Mercy for Animals investigation. And so I just want to read quickly, if as far as Butterball is concerned, again, from this 2011 article from ABC News. And it says, in the hidden camera video, workers can be seen kicking and stomping on turkeys, as well as dragging them by their wings and necks. The video also shows injured birds with open wounds and exposed flesh. During the raid, more than 2,000 birds will be inspected by investigators with the Hoke County Sheriff's Department, as well as independent experts to look for injuries or signs of neglect, according to police. The search warrant executed today includes a court order allowing independent veterinarians to euthanize any birds that are determined to be suffering needlessly. After the raid began, Butterball released a statement saying it has a, quote, zero tolerance policy for any mistreatment of our birds. And the company was conducting its own investigations into the allegations. And I love this. I love this fucking statement. It says, at Butterball LLC, I love that they throw in the limited liability. Our number one priority is to provide for the health and well-being of our birds in order to produce safe and nutritious product for consumers. Butterball takes these allegations very seriously and fully supports the efforts being made on the part of officials. Employees found in violation of Butterball's animal welfare policies will be subject to immediate termination.
This is like the shit every company says when they're caught doing literally anything.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a way also to obviously set up the workers who are, put in the situation where they have to fucking, end up in these kinds of circumstances, to put them on the chopping block, quite literally, instead of taking the responsibility for the company itself.
Right.
So, but that's exactly right, because the company will always defend itself, and they'll just say, this is isolated. But to show you that it is not isolated, I'm going to read actually from a Toronto Star article from 2016 to show you that, this is happening in Canada as well. And it says the title of it is Horrific Footage Captured by Whistleblower at Turkey Slaughter Plant. And it reads as follows. I'm going to skip the kind of intro or whatever, but it says Mercy for Animals, an international organization dedicated to preventing cruelty to farm animals, sent in an undercover whistleblower who worked at the Sofina Foods plant for 3 weeks. With a concealed camera, he captured the entire slaughter process. Our whistleblower simply applied for jobs, and he literally took the first job that hired him, said Krista Hedema, a Canadian vice president for Mercy for Animals. He was hired for what is called the live hang position, which is taking the turkeys that arrive in transport trailers, pulling them out, and putting them on shackles while they're still alive. Most of my time I saw many birds are rough-handled, said the whistleblower in an interview. The overall processing line speed is quite quick, which results in employees roughly pulling birds out of transport crates. A lot of times this results in birds having their legs broken and they're basically still hanged anyway. So they're left to hang with broken legs. Jesus, I honestly fucking feel ill. This is some of the most horrific footage I've ever seen, and what is really critical to understand is the footage is indicative of standard industry practice. The most disturbing scenes are where the turkeys are killed by an automated blade which slits their throats. If they miss the blade, a worker called the, quote, backup killer kills them manually. A fellow worker explains that if the turkey's throat is not slit properly, the bird will go into the scalding water alive. So that's what we had mentioned beforehand. So to say the least, and I'll just stop here because frankly, I'm going to fucking vomit. This is industry-wide, right? It's not an exception. The way that it works right now is one that works towards capital efficiency. And what I will think, and as a guy, and this, this year is no different, where we buy from a local farm that, the bird is never frozen. We get it, immediately after it's, maybe slaughtered and then cleaned and then, hanged just for a day or two for the meat to relax or whatever. And it is more expensive. But I mean, I think about this and I hear horrific shit like this and I just can't even believe it.
Yeah.
So what is the reaction to these sorts of whistleblows? And you may be familiar to this, but there's a term called the ag gag. And basically what this means is that if there is a expose like this, right, and there's an undercover activist that goes into somewhere and takes video and tries to expose the deplorable fucking horrific conditions inside of one of these slaughterhouses or farms or breeders or whatever, there are laws that are passed with the support of lobbyists to say that these recordings cannot be used in like courts and shit like that. And I'm just reading here from the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and it says here, more recently, as is the case in North Carolina and Arkansas, states are passing laws which not only criminalize whistleblowing in agricultural facilities, but any private business, including hospitals, elder care facilities, veteran care facilities, and schools. So it just goes to show you that it's like this becomes a template for other industries to say like, hey, let's push to pass these laws so that we can't be held accountable when we do fucking, disgusting, treatment of people or any other, exploitative industry for that matter. I mean, in an example here of another ag-gag thing, it says in 2011, an undercover investigation at an Iowa Select Farms found employees smashing piglets onto the concrete floor. Another undercover investigation that year at an Iowa Hormel food supplier documented employees beating pigs with metal rods and sticking clothespins into the pigs' eyes and faces. Oh my God. It's so, oh boy. It like makes you wonder, like, do these people get into these jobs because they're fucking sick psychopaths and this is something they're attracted to, or is just like the nature of what they do and the inhumanity of it, like, just make them so fucking crazed and desensitized to violence that they are able to exercise or even derive enjoyment from this. I like literally don't understand the psychology of it, because I hear something like this and I feel like I'm going to fucking puke.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the way to approach it, right, analytically is more on that structural level, because, at the end of the day, it's like the companies that create these situations, it's the nature of the business, it's the way that it's set up, right, that encourages, like, bad behavior, bad treatment, bad conditions for animals, shortcuts and stuff. It's the pressures that are created by the company itself that to produce more, to create more, and ultimately to derive more profit. And that's I think that, especially in thinking in terms of meat, one of the ways why this is relevant, right, is like we're just so disconnected from what the actual kind of production process is of industrial agriculture, that any of this stuff is not just as like a shock value thing, but like it's also just, it's like eye opening, right? It's like this is how like companies profit off of the food industry.
I remember going back to Butterball specifically too, like towards the beginning of COVID, I remember there was like a big outbreak at one of their factories, and they just like were not letting people social distance or anything. And workers who were like coming in late or maybe leaving early because they felt unsafe, they were literally penalized like on a point system, and if you accrued 5 points, you were fired. And it's just like, the company is just like a killing machine designed to like make profit by like throwing animals and people into this like meat grinder. Pun unintentional, but like it just is made for killing and suffering of both animals and humans. Like, it's bad for everybody.
Yeah.
And again, like, even if you were to just think about it on like a completely selfish level, irrespective of morality and shit, like, it makes a worse product. Just like, period. Like, when you go and eat in another country, or like you're abroad or whatever, you're just like struck with how much better food tastes. Like and when people come here from abroad or like move to America, like they often say like how just fucking disgusting the food is here. And it's like, no wonder that we're all like unhealthy. Because if you build it, like you were saying, Shane, like with solely the idea of shareholder value or like profit in mind, then that's where you get like these enormous, agribusiness companies like Butterball or fucking, Cargill or whatever. There's no like federal parameters around the treatment of animals like this, so like they don't have to. They don't have to. It's like Chris, like you were saying in the Crowd Crush Patreon episode. It's like when there's no necessity from like any federal regulation or guidelines or whatever, they won't do it, because to do so would mean, even if it was like hiring a consultant for fucking $100,000 or whatever to like make some minor changes towards like morality, like they won't even do that. So, I hope everybody enjoys their turkey this year.
Thanks a lot.
And fuck, that's a downer, huh?
Yeah.
All right. I will relinquish this. I'm going to fucking vomit and then take a Tums, and then we'll see how we do after that. But
You know, it's good to settle the stomach. A nice boiled cider.
Give me the boiled shit.
Dude, when you brought up mold, speaking of boiled shit, when you brought up mulled wine earlier, I had to look that up because I didn't know what that was. Actually, and it brought back a little Thanksgiving memory of my own. When I looked it up, I was in the only time I've ever had something kind of like that. I was in jail, and it actually was. It actually was over Thanksgiving, and like someone gave me a glass of like jailhouse wine. It was mixed with like Kool-Aid and stuff, but it was warm and it had like the orange rinds in it.
No shit.
They couldn't put the whole slice in, I'm sure. They just put the rinds in, because everything is everything is that is eaten is going to be eaten. But it looked just like the picture on the internet there.
That's so fucking wild.
It's the exact same thing.
Jesus Christ. Maybe I'll make it this week. Might be an idea. I'll pay homage. I'll pay homage to this boiled fucking beverages.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Chris, let me turn it over to you.
Sure.
What do we got?
Okay, so what I got is a little bit about corn.
Woo!
Woo! Hell yeah!
Big fan of corn.
I was telling, I believe Carrie and Shane earlier that when I was like typing up my notes around this, and I saved just saved the document spelled with the K as a little joke to myself. But
A little treat
for myself when I opened this for the show. But about corn, we're going to go back to talk briefly, kind of about the history of corn and kind of where it came from, and then a little bit more about, nowadays and like the mass producing of it in the United States and the ethanol subsidies and stuff like that. And I think we should do an episode maybe that goes a little bit more into like the ethanol subsidies and that kind of stuff. It's pretty interesting and absurd that, as you probably know, they're not going to it's just another way that rich people use to get free money from the government. Like the ethanol subsidies for people that produce corn are not going to generally independent individual farmers or anything like that who grow it for food or anything like that. It's going directly to these big agro businesses. But corn didn't develop by chance. It's not a product of natural selection. It was engineered to be what it is by indigenous people in what's now southern Mexico, at least 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. And the closest wild relative it has is a grass called teosinte, which is about 2 to 3 inches long, like the ear of it. It has maybe a dozen or so kernels that are encased in like this hard coating that's pretty much totally inedible. Basically, useless as a foodstuff. The fibrous husk around it, however, could be used to make like clothing and baskets and stuff like that. So that's what it was originally cultivated for, and over countless generations of selective breeding, we end up with what you and I would recognize as corn. And it's interesting as well. I think that whereas like a lot of technologies that developed in the ancient world were sort of like arrived at independently by different civilizations at the same time without any kind of evidence of trade or communications with one another or anything like that. It's often quite hard to tell exactly where something in the ancient world was invented, I guess you would say. But like corn cultivation, was exclusively the archaeological record very clearly shows that where corn was developed and diversified in what is now South Central Mexico, and then from there spread to other civilizations. So over a period of thousands of years worth of selective breeding, we get like larger ears of corn and more ears per stalk and higher yields and stuff like that. And then they developed the process of nixtamalization. I may be saying that wrong, but that's the soaking the corn kernels in wood ash lye or like lime water or something to remove the hull and free up the nutrients. to make it, so that it could be eaten and better absorbed. And this leads to the creation of masa, which is the cornmeal dough that forms the base of tortillas and tamales and lots of stuff like that. So by the 1400s, corn is when European settlers arrive. By that time, corn is already a staple crop, throughout much of the Americas. And then the European colonizers came, and initially they're not very impressed with corn, preferring wheat as a staple crop, which is familiar to them. And there's even this sort of belief among Spanish settlers that eating too much indigenous food would have like a corrupting effect on them. That like corn is the cause of part of the cause of like physical and cultural differences between them, and like essentially that like eating corn is like going to spontaneously make a European turn Mesoamerican, but nevertheless European settlers start growing it, and in part due to its high nutritional yield per acre, and it didn't require the regular crop rotations like wheat fields do. So it catches on. Corn cultivation spreads quickly through Europe, Italy in particular, much more quickly, in fact, than the other New World crop that's now considered emblematic of Italian cuisine, the tomato. Mm-hmm. And so corn, spreads throughout the Americas, spreads throughout Europe, and of course goes on to become one of the most common symbols of the myths of the first Thanksgiving, the sort of coexistence of the settler and the native, and all this kind of horse shit. And the fact is that obviously the Europeans did not live peacefully next to their neighbors, and committed genocide. And then when they did try to start depending on corn as a staple as the native population had, they did it initially, I guess, without that cultural knowledge of how to process the corn to free up dietary niacin, the soaking it in lime water, the thing I was talking about earlier. And by not doing that leads to malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies and stuff like that, because it can't be absorbed. But corn today, where are we now with corn? Corn today is a huge source of revenue. It's used as a staple crop, livestock feed. It has applications in chemical material manufacturing. It's the source of several varieties of biofuel, which was initially presented as, rather than actually going to more actual like renewable sources of energy and stuff, they try to start blending the gasoline with the percentage of ethanol, using ethanol as some sort of supposedly an environmentally conscious steps towards reducing our dependence on oil. It's even bought and sold as a commodity with futures contracts sold on it, and futures trading of agricultural products basically means that the price for your crop is set well before you harvest. So you have to buy your seeds and your machinery and your fertilizer and your pesticide and all that stuff. And there's only a handful of companies that produce these things. So naturally the prices keep climbing. And selling agricultural products as a commodity like this makes farming these crops very bad for business. Makes it very bad business. The commodities market for soft goods like agricultural products exists in part to regulate prices, not for the consumer but for the manufacturers who are purchasing the raw commodity. And so if corn prices have been high for a couple years, the commodities market will set a low price for a couple years to offset it. So the long run profitability of it of commodity farming is basically nothing. Prices are negotiated before the harvest even happens, so which means that a couple years in a row of low prices and bad harvests can wipe out a small farmer. And so this is where we get the concept of something like what we call a non-operator landlord. So if you're a small farmer, you can't afford the taxes on your land. You can't afford to buy the seed, which if you buy the seed from the good seed, if you buy the seed from Monsanto, it's illegal to withhold a portion of your crop to seed the next season. The Supreme Court actually ruled on this in 2013. So you sell your land to the guy who can afford to do this, and that guy just happens to be a big corporation, or just some like one really rich asshole. And so, like, at this point, because of this kind of stuff, over half of American cropland is currently rented. 80% of this is land owned by these non-owner operators. That is to say, like a farmland owner who has no active involvement in the farming. I think it's like 38% of non-operator landlords are retired farmers, meaning that well over half of them have never actually been farmers themselves or worked in a farm or anything like that.
They're literal like barons, just like leasing out their land to be worked by others. Yeah, and so
basically, we're just a few companies, Cargill, Archer, Daniels, Midland, just a handful of companies can basically control all of the available grain handling assets in the world. And so this is where the this kind of stuff. This is where the farm subsidies come into play. So like in theory, a farm subsidy exists to encourage farmers to grow essential crops, maybe low profit, like corn and wheat and soy and sugar and rice and stuff like that. And like even successful farmers are generally like cash poor. They have a lot of what they have invested in what they're doing. They take out loans to cover the cost of operations, and then repay those loans with profits from the harvest. So it would make sense. It would make sense to make sure that people who grow essential nutritional staples aren't financially ruined in the process. So like this is the type of logic their farm subsidies come from. In practice, however, like most government aid, these kind of things are rarely going to the people who actually need it. Between 1995 and 2019, the top 10% of recipients received 78% of the $223.5 billion doled out. The top 1% received 25% of the payments. And that averages out to 1.7 million per company. 50 of the people on the Forbes top one. I can't remember what year this was, but I'm sure it's still. There was one guy. I believe it was Bill Gates. There's several people we've looked at who own a lot of farmland, but a good chunk of the people on like the Forbes wealthiest list receive farm subsidies. 50 people out of that 400. So there's a lot of like the people who are cashing in on this kind of stuff. Are like already very rich from something else generally. Yes. And so corn, subsidies in keeping the price of corn artificially low only to manufacturers. This doesn't get passed. These aren't savings that get passed along to us. That means that high fructose corn syrup also has become so ubiquitous. Corn syrup has a significantly higher glycemic index than standard white cane sugar, so our bodies break down the carbohydrates in high fructose corn syrup with less effort than it does in cane sugar. So all the glucose in the food hits our bloodstream at the same time, causing blood sugar spike and putting a strain on the pancreas, where it struggles to produce enough insulin to counter this. So this is bad. Like this is in a country where type 2 diabetes is a huge public health issue. It's just very bad that this high fructose corn syrup has essentially replaced sugar in a lot of in a lot of items, and just like pretty much every other public health issue, the poor are disproportionately affected because this cheaper ingredient is going to be used in higher concentration in the lower price point foods, as well as being used to enhance flavors and stuff like that. But what about the non-nutritional applications of corn nowadays, like ethanol? Ethanol was initially, introduced. This started in 2006 when the Bush administration introduced legislation to for a percentage, I believe it was initially 10%, I believe, of the fuel to be cut with ethanol, rather than like I said, doing something actually, switching to some sort of actually renewable source of energy, like wind or solar or something like this. This is sort of like done as this sort of what looked like a sort of empty gesture at first has actually turned out to be possibly even worse for for climate change because of all this corn being produced for this. Right, so like started in 2006 in the Bush administration, whereas like rather than actually take steps towards moving into actual renewable sustainable energy sources like wind or solar or something like that, they passed this law mandating the introduction of a certain percentage of ethanol into the gasoline. The idea being that I think the idea really being that it was going to make the U.S. less dependent on foreign oil, but it was also presented as sort of like some gesture towards being environmentally friendly because it was going to reduce people's energy or reduce our energy on oil. But in reality, the ethanol produced from corn requires more energy per gallon. The amount of energy that goes into manufacturing it per gallon costs more than it does to manufacture a gallon of gasoline or a gallon of oil. So basically, in conclusion, corn, this thing, can't propagate itself because of its thick husk, and it had to be cultivated by humans. And just the fact that it exists today at all is a miracle. It's sort of like a monument to human genius and ingenuity that this was ever even, came into existence in the first place. And now, we, like Europeans, came over to this country and scorned that miracle. And then, now, like thousands of years later, or hundreds of years later, rather, we're destroying the environment by producing it and giving huge subsidies to rich people at the same time.
It's fucking
we're ruining all of our bodies with it. Also, so happy Thanksgiving.
Enjoy your corn souffle.
Man, I really want to make cornbread too. That's a real fucking dagger.
I'm a big fan of that
right now. It's so good.
I love cornbread, man. All right, Carrie.
So
what do we got?
I wanted to talk about very specifically the Ocean Spray jellied cranberry sauce.
Oh fuck, it's so good.
Oh no, you're gonna not like what I'm gonna say.
Love it.
God damn it.
Classic,
oh, it's not a happy story? What?
That classic cylinder of gelatinous cranberry products, one of the most important staples of the Thanksgiving table. I wanted to talk about this as I find it particularly interesting because it's permeated the culture around Thanksgiving in such a way that you don't even really have to be American to see it as like an automatic inclusion in this meal. Like I grew up in a predominantly immigrant community, and Thanksgiving for us was just kind of an excuse to make a bunch of Cuban food, like a big roasted pig, rice and beans, yuca, etc. And then just like a few American dishes, and among these was that nasty jellied cranberry sauce. I'm sorry. Now, we could go into why people who aren't even from America end up celebrating this holiday, but that's definitely a much longer conversation. But anyway, my family did most of our shopping at Sedano's, which is a chain of Hispanic grocery stores headquartered in Miami. And, like on a regular day, it was the kind of place that was just fully dedicated to Cuban or other Latin American food. And then all the ads were in Spanish. But then during the holidays, they'd have the little display up front with random American holiday stuff, and it was usually like prepackaged stuffing, specifically the Ocean Spray jellied cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie filling, and then like the sign saying "Come get your turkey at the butcher." And it's really interesting to me that that was something that was advertised to us and something we took part in, because it's not something that was a part of our culture at all, apart from the obviously unseemly origins of how this holiday is celebrated by Americans in general. It's almost weirder to me that these traditions spread into communities that are just 100% Spanish speaking, and you end up having these cultural staples trickle into family traditions and families that don't have any connection even to the invented traditions of Thanksgiving that American families identify with. And for me, the canned cranberry is especially interesting because, and again, I'm sorry, I know this is an unpopular opinion, it's really not that good.
Boo.
I think.
Boo. It's so good.
Stay cool, folks.
And I think I want to say too that it's not a food snob thing. Like, I grew up eating SpaghettiOs from the can. I just do think that like the blob of gelatinous cranberry is like weird and artificial, and I don't know, it's too weird for me. And
That's right.
I do think we just kind of convinced ourselves that it is good because it's kind of unavoidable at holidays. I'm sorry. And I was wondering, like, why is that? Of course, when you look it up, just like you guys kind of referenced, there's all this stuff about historically it was at the first Thanksgiving, blah, 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 just like all the other Thanksgiving traditions, which are obviously historically questionable and mostly not true. But cranberries have definitely been around for a really long time. There's several species of cranberry that are native to the United States, and there are accounts from various historians about how Native Americans in what we now call New England consume them in different ways, not just as a fresh fruit, but also dried and made into cakes or as tea. And it was also used by some of them as a dye or bait for trapping small animals, as well as medicinal purposes. And there's also a really interesting thing they would make that you might call something akin to an energy bar. It was called pemmican, and it was a high protein meal that they made by mixing cranberries with animal fat and meat and storing it in an animal skin pouch that could then act as kind of a to-go meal when they were traveling over long distances. The combination of animal fat and the acid from the cranberries discouraged bacterial growth, so it could last a pretty long time, which I thought was just pretty neat, and I hadn't heard of that before I was looking into the history of cranberries and how we consume them. So while the Native Americans had a lot of uses for the cranberry, the settlers / genociders who arrived in America likely wouldn't have been familiar with cranberries at all. But a lot of like the articles you read say that they adopted it pretty quickly or whatever, which is honestly kind of not true, but they did start using it more after honeybees were introduced in the 1600s, so that way they could make sweetened sauces. And obviously around the same time, the slave trade was in full effect, so sugar was also becoming more widely available, and that's usually what they would combine cranberries with. For those same reasons, pumpkin pie first appears in writing for the first time around this time too. And so this sweetened sauce is mostly what colonizers would have used cranberries for, and there seems to be a little debate about how widespread this was, but my impression from what I read is that cranberry sauce existed but wasn't a staple of colonial cuisine until we get to commercial cultivation. It was around the early 19th century that cranberries began to be cultivated commercially, and by 1900, over 20,000 acres were in use for cultivation in New England. Cultivating cranberries, from what I read, is kind of a finicky process, and harvesting cranberries was so labor intensive that it would basically put everything else in a given area on hold during harvesting time. For some reason, even though Ocean Spray wasn't founded until 1930, a few articles say that Ocean Spray invented wet harvesting in the 1800s. It was unclear to me who actually originated the process, but in any case, in the 1800s, they start using a different technique to harvest that involves flooding the bogs where the cranberries grow, and then they kind of wade into the bogs to pick the cranberries out, and that was much more efficient than the manual process. They called this wet harvesting. And with wider usage of this technique in the 1900s, growers started to look for more ways to use their crops, like juicing, freezing, drying, and canning. In 1912, they started processing cranberries for canning for the first time, and by 1941, that beautiful jellied cranberry log was available nationwide, courtesy of Ocean Spray.
Log.
Thank you, Ocean Spray.
Thank you so much. This podcast is sponsored by Ocean Spray. Prior to that, you had Eat More Cranberries, which was a brand name for a cranberry grower that they literally came up with as a result of a conversation with an ad agency about how they could get people to eat more cranberries.
Brilliant.
Can you the Don Draper meme?
Yeah, dude, but
where he's got the his percentage just says eat more cranberries.
Can you imagine the creative guy that was just like he couldn't please the client, and he was just like, yeah, I gotta get them to eat more cranberries, and the client's like, that's it,
you genius,
that's it. Damn it, Stevenson, you're a star. I'm gonna make you rich.
So that company had already been around, and they had already been positioning whole cranberry sauce as a turkey compliment in their Thanksgiving ads, and that was really just part of a blanket strategy just to get people to again eat more cranberries. That was the key. But then once Ocean Spray started offering their canned jellied cranberry product, they sort of got into an advertising war in the 40s. And that's when the rhetoric around the idea that cranberries had just always been part of Thanksgiving really ramped up. which again, it's just not true. It had not always been the case. And at this point, you start seeing like full page magazine ads, billboards, newspaper ads, all kinds of ads and promotions about cranberries at Thanksgiving, calling it cranberry time, the cranberry day, saying your Thanksgiving can't be complete and you really can't.
The cranberry zone.
Enter the cranberry zone. You could have gotten a job as an ad guy in the 40s. You could have done it. You could have done it. You know, and they were basically saying you can't honor the traditions of your horrible forefathers without that classic jellied cranberry that you definitely already know and love, and we're not just foisting on you because we found an efficient, cheap way to grow it and we really need to sell it. But ultimately, Ocean Spray wins this ad battle, and they end up dominating the general cranberry market and the Thanksgiving cranberry accompaniment market. In the process, basically gaslighting the country into thinking that they'd just always been eating cranberries and turkey together. It's just a normal thing that you've always done. It's weird that you don't know you were already doing it.
It's true.
So, you know, this is just one of many examples about how commercialization and advertising sort of erased and whitewashed the history of a certain item. Like I said, I didn't really know the uses of cranberries from before. And it is interesting that they are native to the Americas and that Native Americans did have a lot of uses for them. We don't really talk about that. We just have that like jellied cranberry log. And this kind of reminded me of when we were talking about diamonds and how they managed to create this really rigid set of traditions around it just through the power of advertising. And this type of thing spreads culturally in a way that's just really invisible if you don't look for it. So I just think it's kind of useful to look back and see where this stuff really comes from and who's really behind the fact that you have to pretend to enjoy canned cranberry sauce at the holidays.
Is anything just normal and fine and
Nothing
okay
is
to
just
consume?
normal. No.
Fuck, man.
It's all fucked up. I'm sure there's also like somebody will like email us saying like also like they make the cranberries with slave labor or something. Like I'm sure there's even more horrible other shit about this that I didn't even get into, but it's all evil, all of it.
Yeah.
All right, Shano.
I was going to make a joke, you know, not the noble potato, but of course. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about potatoes, in part because they're my favorite, not just holiday food, but just food in general. You know, my dad is from Ireland, and so when I was growing up, you know, basically every single meal we would have some kind of potato dish. And then when we did like holiday stuff, you know, usually would have a couple. You know, like mashed potatoes, roast potatoes, you know, maybe potatoes and the stuffing or whatever. And I just love that shit, and I can't get enough of it. And there's also some other interesting history to the use of potato, and the way that it's spread and the impact that it's had on the culture of not just in the Americas, but around the whole world. So, starting at the beginning, potatoes originated in the Andes Mountains in South America. That's sort of where they're originally from. And they were cultivated by a number of different indigenous peoples in South and then later Central America. The earliest archaeological date that I found is around like 2500 BCE in what would now be modern-day Peru. And so, of course, during the brutal Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire, the food was first introduced to the Spanish and then back to Spain, its other colonies, and then eventually trickles back to Europe and the rest of the world. And sort of similar to, as Chris described, you know, there was this kind of period for, you know, over a century or two of sort of like hesitation, you know, of not really knowing what the, you know, if this is a food we want to eat and cultivate, right, from the settlers' perspective. But then eventually it takes off. Etymologically, too, the English word potato, and this I'm going to read a little bit here from Wikipedia because I found this interesting. The English word potato comes from Spanish patata, which is the name used in Spain. And the Royal Spanish Academy says the Spanish word is a hybrid of the Taino batata, meaning sweet potato, and then the Quechua papa, meaning potato. And it's not mentioned here, but another element that I saw crop up in a couple of other places is that there's a word in Nahuatl, the Aztec language, pototl. So it's some combination of all of these kinds of things, and then, you know, through process of colonization and language, it kind of gets bastardized, and that's where we come to potato. And also, weirdly, here in just reading more from the Wikipedia, the 16th century English herbalist John Gerard referred to sweet potatoes as common potatoes and used the terms bastard potatoes and Virginia potatoes for the species we now call potato. In many of the chronicles, those little bastard potatoes. In many of the chronicles detailing agriculture and plants, no distinction is made between the two. Potatoes are occasionally referred to as Irish potatoes or white potatoes in the United States to distinguish them from sweet potatoes. And I don't think that's true. I've never heard that. The white potatoes, Irish potatoes, I don't know.
I've never
Maybe
heard
somebody
that,
out there.
yeah.
But anyway, part of the reason why it did end up, expanding and being brought, back to Europe and then through the rest of Eurasia is because sort of what Chris was saying about corn. Potato is a miracle crop, right? Both in terms of the amount of calories per acreage, right? You can get, but also the adaptability. In the Andes, right? Potatoes in their sort of original space, like they were cultivated into like thousands of different varieties. Now there's, like with everything else that Europeans have taken, there's only like a few that we really use. But again, Chris, I think you mentioned something like this, prior to the Columbian Exchange, the main staple foods in Europe in particular were all the grains that we know, like wheat and barley and stuff. And so when you can introduce something else, and then, when potatoes were brought back in the late 16th century onward, and as they expanded and were introduced in different areas and adapted in different areas in Europe, they had a huge impact on the civilization there. And this is an interesting bit from a 2011 article in the Quarterly Journal of Economics by Nathan Nunn and Nancy Kahn. And the conclusion from this, I'll just read here. Quote, this study examines the effect of the introduction of potatoes on population and urbanization in the Old World during the 18th and 19th centuries. The nutritional and caloric superiority of potatoes relative to existing Old World staple crops, together with their introduction from the New World to the Old World, allows us to use a strategy similar to difference in differences to estimate the causal effect of the availability of potatoes on population and urbanization. According to our estimates, the introduction of the potato explains 25 to 26% of the increase in Old World population between 1700 and 1900.
Wow.
And 27 to 34% of the increase in urbanization. End quote. So again, I'm sure I didn't really go deep into the methodology here. But they're not the only people to have made this claim. This is by some people considered a pretty conservative estimate about how significant the impact was in terms of allowing for the population growth. And that also then has political consequences, right? Like the entire process of colonialism, right? And the extraction of resources, material, and then, human labor and stuff that the European empires were able to do is basically what drove us into the modern world, right? Via the horrible oppressive system of colonialization and then capitalism, which was born out of that. And so here's one bit that I had known something about prior to doing this research, and I really wanted to include it here. So this is from a piece by William McNeill from the journal Social Research in 1999 called How the Potato Changed the World's History. And this is also, again, just from the conclusion. The whole thing is really interesting. Just from the conclusion there here. Quote, it is certain that without potatoes, Germany could not have become the leading industrial and military power of Europe after 1848. Wow. And no less certain that Russia could not have loomed so threateningly on Germany's eastern border after 1891. In short, the European scramble for empire overseas, immigration to the United States and elsewhere, and all the other leading characteristics of the 2 centuries between 1750 and 1950 were fundamentally affected by the way potatoes expanded Northern Europe's food supply. End quote. So, if you're like me and you're wondering, how did those world wars happen? Blame the potato.
This is so
Would you go back and kill baby potato?
They really are bastard potatoes.
They really are bastard potatoes.
They really are.
Of course, now in the modern world, or rather, I should say, in our contemporary moment, what does it look like? Potato consumption is huge worldwide. what's the year I have for this? Okay, so in 2017, the total world potato production was estimated at 388 million metric tons
Hang on.
of potatoes.
388
Million metric tons.
metric tons.
I can't even
Yes.
fathom.
It's
just
superliminal.
oodles.
Yeah.
Oodles.
Too much.
It's really, really liminal.
The top 5 potato producers. You want to take a guess? In 2017?
Well, if you're a real potato
ADM.
fan, name the top 5.
I'm talking in terms of countries here.
I
What are
know.
the top
Oh.
5 potato producing countries?
Is the United States one?
The United States is number 5.
Okay, I got one.
Okay.
China.
China's number 1, of course.
I got 2.
All right. India's got to be a biggie.
I was
India's
thinking-
number
yeah,
2.
I was also thinking India.
Can we throw a wild card? Can we do Nigeria?
No,
Bzzzt.
not sure where Nigeria places on the list.
Wrongo.
Is Mexico one?
Nope.
Okay, all right. My first bet.
Canada.
Nope.
Really?
The other two,
Brazil.
that- No. Number 3 is Russia, and number 4 is Ukraine.
The vodka.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the vodka.
The vodka.
I mean, also
should've
the
thought of
food.
that.
no,
They
it's
do.
the
They do
vodka.
eat potatoes. In
No, that's
Eastern
factually
Europe.
wrong. I
It's the
checked it out.
vodka. It's the vodka. It's so crazy.
Anyway, so it's quite a lot of potatoes. In the USA, potato production in 2020. Of course, these are all estimates, but the estimate was 414.25 million centrum weights
What the fuck is
of
that?
potato. I had never heard of this term before. I had to look it up.
Never heard
Centrum
that.
weight is, I guess, a sort of commodities, like food commodities weight system or something. I'm sure it's used outside of markets, but it's used particularly. It means 100 pounds. It's like an old British
wow.
imperial term.
Fucking imperial.
So,
bullshit.
100 times that number, 100 times 414 million pounds. In terms of what that gets turned into, where those potatoes go, 35% of the potato crop is turned into French fries.
Hell yeah, dude.
28% is used for fresh, so that's like potatoes that you would buy in the store, right?
Okay.
Just in a big sack of potatoes. And 13% goes to potato chips.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised it's not more for potato chips. Wow.
What can you do? In terms of different potato companies, the world's largest potato processor is a Canadian company called McCain's. So they do like they create a whole slew of like frozen products. So if you go to the store, you buy like frozen French fries or frozen hash browns or stuff like that. But in the United States, I was trying to figure out like who's the number 1 potato producer, because this is similarly like, even though I'm super into potatoes, I've thought a lot about the history and the kind of like abstract, like big picture stuff. I never really thought about like who is making the potatoes, right? Like where are we getting them from? And the largest potato producer in the United States is a farming company called R.D. Uffett.
What?
The what?
And it's basically one guy and his family, this guy named Ron Uffett.
How do you spell Uffett?
Offut. Here, let me send you guys a picture of this guy.
Oh, let's see him.
All right. let's
Ron
see.
Uffett.
Good old Ron.
Oh, this guy looks like a real potato head.
That's Ron, all right.
So Ron Uffett, and this company, R.D. Uffett, which has like hundreds of subsidiaries, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a second, owns 190,000 acres of farmland.
What?
In the United States.
Wow.
He's only he's the second largest like farm acreage owner. Guess number 1 in the United States.
Is it the
Wait.
people we did the episode on? No. I can tell by your face.
Wait,
it's
hang
not.
on. Wait, what are we guessing?
The who in the United States, who owns the most?
Isn't that Bill Gates?
Who has the most farm acreage?
Yeah, it's gotta be
Bill
Bill
Gates.
Fuck.
Yeah.
It's Bill
So
Gates?
Bill Gates.
That guy's up
Bill-
to something, man.
Bill Gates has 242,000 acres. And so Ron Uffett, again, is number 2 with 190. So Ron Uffett was born in 1942. He's either 78 or 79 years old. It's really hard to find stuff out about him, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I did manage to find one article from Forbes from 1997 called "The Sultan of Spuds." that gives a little bit of background about this guy. So I'll read here. You've probably never heard of Fargo, North Dakota's Ronald Uffett. His name is mysteriously missing from lists of the world's largest vegetable growers. His employees drive plain white pickups, no logos, that blend into the snow-blown landscape that played to such a strong effect in last year's film Fargo. Nice little reference there. But 54-year-old Uffett, a fourth-generation Great Plains farmer, is at the center of a big business, very big. He grows more potatoes than anyone else in the world. J.R. Simplot included. I guess
What?
J.R. Simplot is a reference that you should get if you're in
Goddamn
if you're in the potato world. This year, his R.D. Uffett Co. will farm 55,000 acres, pumping out 1.8 billion pounds of russet, Burbank, Shepparton, and Ranger russet potatoes. Uffett is the top supplier of spuds to the processing operations of J.R. Simplot, Lamb Weston, Ore-Ida, and Northern Star Company. The next largest potato operation is about 1/3 Uffett's size. Other Uffett holdings: 45,000 acres of rotated crops, including beans and corn, an 8-acre processing plant, an agricultural lending company, car dealerships, and 57% of publicly traded RDO equipment, the largest string of John Deere stores in the country. At a time when farms are dying off as fast as crops in a beetle blight, Uffett's companies had sales of $575 million last year. Uffett himself is probably worth over $300 million, making him one of North Dakota's richest people. Why the anonymity? The burly, cowboy-booted Uffett says he doesn't want to stir up envy. Besides, anti-corporate farming laws and other vestiges of populism still exist in the Great Plains states. Uffett skirts that problem by not incorporating his farm division. He also spreads his acreage over 10 states and leases or swaps about half of his land. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. This helps him camouflage his holdings and gives him a hedge against disastrous weather, like the floods that recently turned patches of North Dakota into the Ice Age lakes they used to be.
Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ, dude. Fuck.
That's just a little sampling of this guy, Uffett. And I want to go more into detail about the leasing and swap land thing, because that's really interesting. But before I do, a few other things. This guy's basically a ghost. I tried to find like anything about him. It's really, really difficult.
That's terrifying, honestly.
His net worth, there's no way to tell. Again, this Forbes article from, almost 25 years ago estimated at around $300 million. And we'll see what the estimates for like how much the company's like revenue and profits are, and a few of the other things that I'm going to read. And we could guess that he almost certainly is a billionaire by now.
Yeah.
Sure.
If not like, right on the edge of that.
Even like 300 million, in 1997 in today's dollars is just $500 million. It's $520 million dollars.
And so, in terms of like what I could find out about him, they have him on the company's website. They have the same like bio bootstrap bullshit stuff where it was like, I founded this company with my dad. It was like right after he got out of college. His dad was a farmer, and it seems like his whole point of ingenuity that made him rich was that like his dad had a small farm, and he took a mortgage out on the farm to buy a dealership, a John Deere dealership. And so that's and so then he just started expanding and like buying the equipment and then leasing it out or whatever, renting it to other farmers and stuff. And that's how he exploded big time. His other like savvy business thing was in the 1970s as McDonald's was exploding. He cut deals to basically provide the potatoes to make the French fries for all the
that must
franchise
have been huge.
Yeah,
That must have been
so that was one of the big turning points. And besides that, he's mentioned in a few places for getting these like sort of industry awards. He's gotten some like fancy government awards in North Dakota, from like the governor's office. There's like a page. He got some like Roosevelt Award. And one of the things that's mentioned on the site, as well as in a couple of those kinds of things, is how important sustainability is. And if you go to their website, it's all these like really pretty pictures of these very green fields and very nice looking things. They had an IPO for the company in 1997.
Oh, really?
But then they went back private in 2003 because the IPO didn't go so well. And his daughter, Christy Uffett, was like the only person who like turned a profit in her like regional sector. Because again, they have like fucking farms and shit all over over across like 10 states or something. So she was then made CEO in 2006. And there's a few other things about her, and it's mostly her talking about how important the corporate culture is, and running the blah 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 bullshit. But, it was under her tutelage and leadership then that the company continued to do well after that kind of bad business thing with the IPO. They expanded internationally, and they have stuff in Ukraine and Russia now as well.
Oh, wow.
One notable thing that I don't have time to really go into, but they were slapped along with a lot of other potato producers. They were slapped with a lawsuit in 2013 over price fixing, which then I think Uffit tried to countersue or something, or get it dismissed or whatever. But again, I'm not going to go too much into the details on it because I want to focus on the land and sustainability stuff.
Sure.
And so I want to read a little bit from this one piece from Inforum.com by Mikhail Paetz from June 2015 called Uffit Defends His Company's Land Stewardship. And so this is written from Park Rapids, Minnesota. So reading here, the patriarch of the biggest potato producer in the world says his company is not the poor environmental steward critics have accused it of being in a snafu over Minnesota water permits. And I love that opening sentence because it's literally the phrasing of my t-shirt that says I'm a good land steward is raising more questions. Ron D. Uffit, emeritus chairman of the board of R.D. Uffit Corporation in Fargo, says his company got ahead of itself in applying for more preliminary water well permits than it needed or wanted. But that was, in part, a reaction to a changing permit application process and a rare offer to explore buying land from Potlatch Corp., which has sold thousands of acres it has used as timberlands. In April, Uffit's company appealed a Minnesota Department of Natural Resources decision to require environmental assessment worksheets on several of its 56 water permit applications. A court recently agreed to drop the appeal after Uffit withdrew all but 18 of those applications. The withdrawal prompted some to question why the company was against the environmental assessments. And we can just speculate as to why. Why didn't he want his land to be checked out?
Hard to know.
We'll get into more of that, but I want to read, there's some more kind of bio stuff in this article about him that again fleshes it out. So this was from 2015, so whatever, 18 years after the other article. So the little heading here is Spud Specialist. At age 72, Uffit has headed his company since 1965. He started with a family farm on non-irrigated land in his native Clay County. Today, the company has headquarters near downtown Fargo. Uffit operations are housed in two substantial companies that have revenues of about $3 billion. The R.D. Uffit Farming and Food Company and the RDO Equipment Co. Uffit's daughter, Christy Uffit, CEO of the equipment company, recently became chairwoman of both companies. Uffit's son-in-law, Keith McGovern, is the CEO of the farming company. Uffit is the largest single potato producer in the world, and probably the biggest ever. The Uffit operation includes some 60,000 acres of irrigated potatoes in Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. A third of Uffit's U.S. potatoes are grown on 9 farms in Minnesota, most of which supply potatoes to the Park Rapids Lamb Weston / RDO Frozen Foods factory, including 8,000 to 9,000 acres in the Park Rapids area. The company owns roughly 40,000 acres in the state and gets the rest of its rotation acres for other crops through a variety of partnership deals, often with landowners or farmers who control those crops. So I won't read any more from that, but I will say there was one funny thing, because Uffit kind of was upset, that the implication that why am I being slapped with all these environmental regulations? I'm a good steward of the land. And the commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, stepped in to also defend Uffit. I guess because they're friendly. And the only reason why I even want to bring this up is the guy's name was Tom Landwehr. And the second I saw that, I was because Landwehr, in German, Landwehr is a military term. It means a militia.
Oh boy.
So
I wonder how he got that.
Yeah, it's if he was a Hessian mercenary stock or something. In any case, so a little bit more detail on what was going on with again all those applications for the water wells and why there was withdrawn comes to us from a piece from May 2020 from the Environmental Working Group by Donald Carr called National Potato Giant Uses Obscure Leasing Scheme to Skirt Environmental Oversight in Minnesota. And so, reading from here, one of the nation's largest industrial agriculture operations is hiding behind a small family farm to try to avoid environmental oversight of a plan to clear-cut pristine Minnesota forest land for a huge expansion of its potato growing acreage.
Jesus.
R.D. Uffett Farms, headquartered in Fargo, North Dakota, is the nation's largest potato grower. This kind of the same stuff. In Minnesota, Uffett Farms operates in the north-central region known as the Pineland Sands, above an aquifer that is extremely vulnerable to pollution because of its shallow depth and the area's porous soils. For nearly 30 years, Uffett has expanded its potato-growing empire in Minnesota, clearing thousands of acres of forest in the Pineland Sands area for an irrigated potato fields. In its most recent expansion phase in 2015, Uffett bought almost 8,000 acres of forest land in the Pineland Sands. Soon thereafter, the company applied to the Department of Natural Resources, or DNR, for 54 irrigation well permits and assessments, making clear it intended to immediately clear-cut its recently purchased forest land to grow even more irrigated potatoes. Concerned about potential pollution of the drinking water aquifer by nitrogen fertilizer, DNR ordered Uffett Farms to complete an initial environmental review of its application package. But as it had repeatedly done with earlier projects, Uffett avoided environmental review by temporarily whittling down the size of its project, ostensibly reducing its potential environmental impact, and with it, the need for an environmental review.
Fuckers.
In 2017, Uffett sold about 600 acres of its new holdings to Tim Nolte, an area farmer. As part of the sale, Nolte agreed to lease back acres to Uffett Farms for potato production. He also agreed to apply for 3 water appropriation permits, totaling 100 million gallons per year, to irrigate 303 acres. The permits that Nolte has now applied for cover 3 of the exact same wells from Uffett's original 2015 application package, which DNR had refused to approve without environmental review. So, what's going on here, if I can just pop out of this a little bit, and this is a strategy that they've basically done wherever, right, is as they're acquiring new land, they'll buy up, like in this case, like forest land, right, with the intention to just like slash and burn and turn it into new irrigated fields for potatoes. And then when they meet any kind of pushback on that, what they do to avoid the regulatory oversight is it's just a scheme where they sell the land to somebody else. In this case, in a lot of these cases, like a small family farm, right? So they put them as the front guys. They, and then, but secretly, then they're leasing the land back to Uffett to actually do the work. But then that way, it doesn't look like one company is doing the major expansion, right? And it won't hit those thresholds for regulation because technically it's owned by a bunch of smaller farmers. It's like a really like shitty scheme.
That is so fucked up.
Let me just finish here reading from this the Environmental Working Group project because it talks about like why this is an issue. Drinking water from community and household wells near irrigated potato fields is already contaminated with nitrate pollution exceeding state and federal safe drinking water limits. Rural communities have been forced to spend millions of dollars to remove toxic nitrates, a breakdown product of the nitrogen in fertilizer, from their drinking water. And millions more in drinking water treatment costs would be on the horizon if Uffett is permitted to keep using small farmer strawmen to expand its footprint while evading environmental review. In February, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture released the results of tests monitoring the groundwater on an Uffett Farm site. The extremely high nitrate levels confirm that best management practices on Uffett's irrigated acreage cannot prevent unsafe levels of nitrate from leaking into the shallow drinking water aquifer of the Pineland Sands. In an expert report supporting EWG's comments on the proposed Nolte project, George Kraft, Ph.D., a hydrologist specializing in assessing groundwater pollution from irrigated farming in porous soils, makes clear that groundwater nitrate contamination at levels double to quadruple the legal limit will likely occur at the proposed Nolte project site. So, it's again, this is a scheme that they do to avoid, meeting the sort of threshold where they would get hit with the environmental review. And in practice, what it's doing is, not only the environmental impact of like destroying like the forest or whatever to grow more fucking potatoes, but it's also poisoning the groundwater. And it's
That's
making
so
it dangerous then
fucked.
for people to drink from.
Like now,
Yes.
which is insane.
Yes. And I want to wrap this up because this is not, the Environmental Working Group is not the only people to have kind of challenged Uffit farms in the past. And there is a really good report by the White Earth Land Recovery Project. And I'll just read from their Wikipedia page to give you a sense of who they are. The White Earth Land Recovery Project is a nonprofit grassroots organization that seeks to recover land for the Anishinaabe people on the White Earth Indian Reservation in western Minnesota and develop programs to achieve sustainability and environmental preservation. Organization was founded in 1989 by tribal member and former vice presidential candidate Winona LaDuke. So this report is from 2001. It's titled Potatoes, Frogs, and Water, R.D. Uffit Co. and Northwestern Minnesota's Future. And it's written by LaDuke, Geo-Ann Baker, Kevin Gasco, and Ann Bailey. And what I'll just do is I'll read the summary portions. It's a pretty good report, and it goes into kind of the mapping through like the entire history of like potato production and its relationship to indigenous cultures and civilizations in the Americas and a lot of the stuff that we've covered. But I'll just read the overview summary, like the main key points that the report puts out. So, many of the pesticides used on potatoes have adverse health effects. Out of 41 pesticides commonly used in potato production, 14 are considered carcinogens. 33 of these 41 pesticides have been linked to biological changes in endocrine systems, reproductive systems, and male fertility. A small dose of an endocrine-disrupting chemical at a critical point in an organism's growth may contribute to the development of abnormalities in sexual organs, birth defects, behavioral changes, and cancers. 31% of wells tested in the Otter Tail County and 14% of the wells tested in Hubbard County's Todd Township had nitrate levels higher than the drinking water standards set by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. 53% of the wells tested in Otter Tail County had detectable levels of nitrates, and 31% had detectable levels of triazine herbicides. In 1998, Uffit and smaller potato farmers applied more than 100,000 pounds of nitrogen to the land that overlies the city of Perham's wells, accounting for 60% of all fertilizer used on that land. U.S. standards for nitrates in safe drinking water may be set too low. The acceptable level for nitrate contamination in the United States is 10 parts per million, but in most other developed countries, it is half that. At least 2 chemicals Uffit applies to crops have been proven to cause deformities, abnormalities, or mortality in frogs. And this is the frog connection in the title of the piece, and there's a whole section of this report that shows like pictures of frogs, just like totally fucked up from this chemical stuff. A lot of time, growing extra legs.
Fuck.
The kind of things that you look at and you think like this is like radiation mutation or something. It's like really like fucked up stuff. The aquifer from which a number of lakes and rivers in the area draw their water has been tapped aggressively by Uffit and other farmers. From 1974 to 1996, the number of irrigation systems used in the area increased from 5 to 257. Uffit-related enterprises hold 1/3 of the irrigation withdrawal permits. In addition, each year the Lamb Weston/RDO plant in Park Rapids, Minnesota, draws 556 million gallons of water from a lower aquifer. While the impact of exponentially increasing withdrawals on area aquifer systems is not yet known, one simulation model conservatively projects a 6-foot decline in the water table by the next decade.
Fuck.
While there are those who contend that Uffit's partnership with Lamb Weston and its parent, ConAgra, allows our region to benefit from participation in the global market, we must recognize that ConAgra has been cited for numerous labor and environmental violations, price fixing, and health and consumer recalls. On June 27, 2001, a chemical fire destroyed an R.D. Uffit Co. storage building south of Park Rapids, releasing potentially toxic fumes and chemical residue into the air and possibly into adjoining soil. Although no assessment has yet been made of the extent of the health problems related to the fumes released by the fire, this incident raises questions of public safety with regard to Uffit's facilities, especially those that contain massive stockpiles of potentially toxic chemicals. And then the last point here, recently developed best management practices for potato production are currently in place in Minnesota, but with little or no knowledge of the long-term cumulative effects of chemicals and increased use of groundwater, best management practices may be, at best, a paradigm of guesswork. Moreover, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's ability to monitor producers' compliance with these standards is limited. So that's just like the summation of the report, right? Like there's like way more details in the rest of it. And again, this was put out, 20 years ago. And the more recent stories of, their kind of increased expansion is, over the last couple years, like even like in the midst of the pandemic. So, that's the weird potato man, Ron Uffett, who you probably didn't know about. I certainly didn't. And most likely, if you're having potatoes, French fries, certainly. But even just potatoes at the store is a good chance you're getting some Uffett potatoes.
Terrible.
It's
a terrible man.
Like every time that you think you have like a handle on how things are going, and as much like research as we do on this shit, there's somebody fucking lurking in the shadows, man.
I mean, it just makes you wonder, like, how many more people there are like this that are like super rich off of something so sinister that you never even hear their name.
I mean, even just across like the little dish that we put out today. Each of these 4 things, it's like there is like in a lot of these cases, like sometimes it's just there's one guy. It's just like one fucking guy who runs who just runs the potato racket and is like poisoning the earth to do so.
Even with ocean spray, it's been like the same handful of families doing the cranberry farming for like the last 200 years, basically.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's all like that, yeah.
And again, one of the points here that was brought up in one of these articles is like, essentially way after that initial like 1997 profile that I can find from him in Forbes, the estimated like profit was $3 billion a year in these companies. Like that's the estimated.
Fuck.
So like his net worth, I mean, again, almost certainly, if, between him and the rest of his family, if not billionaires, certainly right on the edge of that. And, they own like all the largest like John Deere dealerships.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they're the ones who, so all the stuff recently going on with like the strike, you probably put
vertical integration. Very nice.
Yeah, I mean that's literally what one of the things that is said. Like that was his ingenuity, was because a lot of prior to like the mid-century, like a lot of that was like broken up, right? Like you'd have farmers, you'd have food processing, and then you have food distribution. Those would be taken care of by different companies. Now, he was like one of the guys who like had the idea of like, why don't I just buy all of that?
Right.
So they control quite a bit.
You know what our problem is?
Fuck them.
Yeah. we don't own anything.
Yeah.
Owning nothing. Basically, best thing you could probably, I guess the best thing you could probably own is like a car. Like that's as far as we're gonna get, and even that, I don't even fucking have one of those. So fuck it. Yeah, all sucks. Damn.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving!
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, guys. So happy that we were able to come
to be
together.
clear, if you want to call us hypocrites for it, like I'm still gonna eat all this shit.
Yeah,
I am too.
I love potatoes. I'm sorry. We did try to grow potatoes.
I'm not gonna eat the cranberry. So
I'm
not a hypocrite. We did try to. We ate one potato, right? We got to eat one potato.
No, that was the very first year. We only ended up with one potato. This year we ended up with a whole bunch of potatoes.
That's right.
I was able to make like a little potato salad.
I remember now. Yeah, that was actually really nice. Potatoes very easy to grow. Just we did it so easily. So I recommend doing it
it's
yourself.
literally, this is all like miraculous food, which is part of the reason why it's so ingrained in the Thanksgiving myth. Like all of these things are all native to the Americas, right?
Yeah.
Which is why they're the sort of these like cultural staples. And they truly are miraculous. And have allowed us to, grow and achieve certain levels of abundance and what have you.
Right.
Yeah.
But as Chris also pointed out, it's also like now it's being just like, used to like fuck up the whole planet.
Everything.
World.
Yes.
So enjoy your time off.
Enjoy it.
Hopefully you have some time with your family. We will also be taking a break the next week. So
we need to. I'm going to be doing. There's a guy I'm trying to find out in like North Dakota or something like that. So I'm going to be busy for a while.
Up at Defense League.
We will still have a Patreon episode next week, but
correct.
Yeah, we will.
Main show will be a little Thanksgiving or post Thanksgiving break.
Yeah, you know it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, friends.
All right.
Till next year. Till next time.
Gobble gobble.
Okay. Stay cool.
Okay.
Goodbye. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
The eagle is a majestic bird.
The eagle is a scavenger, a thief, and a coward. A symbol of over 10 centuries of European mischief.
The turkey
The turkey is a truly noble bird, Native American, source of sustenance of our original settlers, an incredibly brave fellow who will not flinch at attacking a regiment of Englishmen single-handedly. Therefore, the national bird of America is going to be
The eagle.
the eagle.
We're waiting for the chirp, chirp, chirp of an eaglet being born. Waiting for the chirp, chirp, chirp on this humid Monday morning in this congressional incubator.
God knows the temperature's hot enough to hatch a stone, let alone an egg.
We're waiting for the scratch, scratch, scratch of that tiny little fellow. Waiting for the egg to hatch.
I'm just laughing to myself. I was just about to close this tab, but the latest statement by Donald J. Trump, it's just really good. Anyway, it's not
What is
important.
it?
We
What
can
is
get
it?
to it.
Okay.
All right. Can I, it's so short. This
Yeah,
can-
not
we'll-
for the show, but just for that.
this is just for okay. So, great job by Kevin McCarthy last night, setting a record by going over 8 hours of speaking on the House floor in order to properly oppose communism. We must never forget what the Democrats have done at the highest level of evil. If Mitch McConnell had fought, you would have a different Republican president right now.
Oh my God.
I love that. That's how you oppose communism, is going over doing a filibuster. That's how you get rid of communism.
100%.
That's right. You talk it down.
Talk it down, baby. Talk it down, baby. Talk it down, baby. Talk it down, baby. Talk it down, baby.